Hello and welcome. I am Kate, also known as the Daily Tarot Girl, and I'm so excited to be chatting with Jenna Matlin today. Jenna has been reading tarot. She's been a tarot reader since the 1990s. She's also a clairvoyant medium. She is an author, a speaker, a teacher, and a spiritual business mentor. She is the author of 3 tarot books. Have Tarot Will Party, which I have read in its entirety, cover to cover, which I don't do with a lot of books. I usually skip around. I've read this whole thing. She's also the author of Have Tarot Will Travel, and the new upcoming book, Will You Give Me a Reading, which is out in November. So welcome, Jenna. I am so happy to have you here.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to spend this time with you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So a question that I've been dying to know the answer to is why tarot? Because there is so many different things that you can choose from. Like there's palmistry, there's astrology, there's I know you're a medium, so you've explored that, but there's so many different things to get into. So what is it about tarot that drew you in? Why did you choose tarot?
I think a lot of people may nod their heads when I say that tarot chose me, exactly, like tarot chooses you. And that when tarot is your thing and you meet other tarot people, it clicks. It just feels like you have found your people in a weird way that's hard to explain. A lot of people ask me too, like, well, when did you realize you were psychic? And that's the wrong question. The right question is, when did I realize that other people weren't? And so I was a very strong psychic kid. I had a really strong psychic event happen at the age of 12. I started reading palms at 12 and 13. And then at 14, a lovely drag queen gave me my first tarot deck. And at first it was a fight because my intuition was used to working in one way and now was being forced to use a tool in a different way. So one of the things I always tell people is, like, if you use tarot, you're no less psychic than someone who's a no-tool psychic, that they all have their own voice. Why tarot specifically is the thing that caught me. What I love about it is that when I'm reading for others, they can very easily see why the message is the way it is, that they are choosing. And there is a great power in having the visual, symbolic, and spatial aspects of a reading that strikes truth in a way that very few things can do as quickly. And it's beautiful to watch. I, as you know, been doing this a long time. And just when I think, oh man, I know everything there is to know about tarot or reading tarot, the bottom breaks. And then I find myself on a new level, even after all these years. So it's endlessly fascinating and I'm endlessly curious, and I never get bored with it. And that's really at the brass tacks of it. That's why I still do it and why I think tarot is so special.
Oh yeah, I very much relate to that. I find tarot, I always say like tarot is like an onion, like it has so many layers and you can never really master it, which is what I like about it. And I think that's what a lot of people find frustrating about it too. There's just like so many different facets to it. But yeah, it never gets boring. There's so many different ways to engage with the cards and to work with them. And it never gets boring.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
Yeah. So you've been reading professionally since the 90s. So what made you take that jump from, I'm sure there was like a period of time where you were just, studying the cards for yourself, and then you got into doing it professionally. What made you want to take that jump to start offering readings to the public?
The jump wasn't that long. So when I got my first deck at 14, by my drag queen friends, that's a whole other story for another time. But they were like all my uncles. And I memorize at least one word for every card within 6 weeks, like I had that real young brain that could capture and remember things back
Yeah.
then. And I read for their Victor Victoria party that October, and I was hooked. And so after that, I read for all my friends. I read for everyone I could. At the age of 18, I started reading at a new age bookstore. But I found that I wasn't emotionally ready. And so I would find myself in situations with clients that I had no idea how to navigate. So with that, as well as the social stigma of tarot, I never considered it to be a career option. And then, spent the next, like 20, like 10, like 15 years, like getting my degrees and doing all kinds of other work. But it really took having a kind of a tower moment, and I think that happens to a lot of readers, that there's a tower moment where you're fired or you're let go, or you're just sitting there going, I am desperately unhappy. And that moment happened to me in 2012. And I was so traumatized by what happened to me, even just looking at advertisements for jobs in an office setting was giving me a trauma response. And I was just like, I can't do that again. And I never felt it was a fit. It was always like, trying to move a square peg into a round hole. So then I said to myself, well, what's the thing that is the best that I do out of all the things? And it was like, you read tarot, like everyone says how good you are. Could I make a living doing this? I'm going to give myself 6 months to try. And that's what I did. And I found that it was just the perfect fit for me. I was very lucky in that way. And I was also very privileged at the time to have someone who could support me for 6 months to give me that option. And I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, wow. It's interesting. 2012 was a really shitty year for me too. And I remember leading up to 2012, there's a lot of talk in the new age communities about 2012 being this time of shifting and all that, right? It's going to be so amazing.
You're right. The Mayan, my world did end according to the Mayans in many ways.
2012 was when I'm trying to think what happened. Something happened to me in 2012 because I remember finding an old post that I'd made on Facebook where I had posted something like, God, this year is so shitty. There's just a lot of like big changes, I think, that happened to me in 2012. And I'd been a personal trainer. I've been doing that almost full time. And then I kind of lost my job doing that. And I started doing tarot in a bigger way in 2012. I'd been doing it professionally prior to then, but very, very like part-time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I kind of shifted to doing it in a bigger way in 2012. So that's interesting that we have that in common.
Yeah.
So I want to hear a little bit about, your new book, but first I want to ask you, what have you learned about being a professional reader that you wish you'd known when you first started doing professional readings?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a big question. I wish if I could be like Marty McFly and like get in my car and go back in time to talk to myself, like I'd be like, boundaries, girl, boundaries is what you need. And don't let people take advantage of you. And like, it's okay to say no. It's okay if that's not a fit. That would be one of the things I would go back to tell myself. Number 2, watch for moments when your bias and your projection and your transference is getting in the way of the reading. And really do a lot of self-monitoring to ensure that when those moments happen, and they will for all of us, that you catch it, because that's work for you. And the third thing is always, when you find that as a pro reader, you're going to go through moments where you have emotional fatigue and burnout. It's just part of the work for any kind of service professional, whether you're a therapist or a coach or anything. When you find your empathy starting to flag, and also when you start talking about yourself more in sessions, like your own stories, those are always, for me, key indicators that you need to take a step back and replenish yourself. So those are some of the big ones I would say, going back, that if I could have really hammered that to myself a little bit better, it would have made those beginning years a little smoother for me.
Oh, wow. That's such an interesting thing that you said about when you notice yourself talking about your own story a lot in readings, that
Mhm.
that's kind of an indication that you need to take care of yourself more. Because I've noticed that off and on with
Mhm.
my own readings. When I give readings, sometimes I try to keep my own story and my own stuff out of it as much as possible, because this is about the person I'm reading for. It's not about me. But sometimes I notice I just start doing it, like, and I'm like, oh, I have to I have to step back and stop doing it, because I'm like, no one wants to hear me go on and on about my own stuff in a reading. So that's really interesting that you said that. So
Mhm.
what kinds of things do you do to protect yourself from getting burnt out? Because I
Mhm.
find that especially when you're reading for other people, it can lead to burnout pretty quickly, especially if you're doing like heavy readings and stuff like that. So is there anything
Yeah.
that you find really helpful for you that
Mm.
helps you avoid getting burnt out?
Well, girl, you know what? I have a whole chapter of that in this book right
Ah!
here. Will you give me a reading? This book is different because it does have a how to read tarot like chapters, but it also has chapters for people that want to read for others. So, like, what do you do when a reading goes south? When they're like,
Mhm.
everything you're saying is wrong. And you're just like, oh, right. Like, what do you do? And so I talk about that, but I have a piece on burnout in here because I don't think that we talk about that as readers enough. Um, so to jump back what you just said, like sometimes your intuition, right, will give you a story that you've had, and that is a device that you can use to help the other person. So you got to be real careful, because sometimes that's a device, and then sometimes it can be a sign of burnout. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So, what, like, as you're saying the story and being like, is this a device to further this person's healing? And are they in a place to really grok what you're saying right now? So anyways, for burnout, I think, um, like having a mentor, getting readings yourself, especially if you've had a tough session, so that you're having another, like in the way that therapists do, that you're having another reader helping you walk through what was difficult, like what is yours to carry, having very strong business boundaries, like the phone is off. Like my phone has do not disturb starting at 3. If you are not in my contacts, you don't get through. Like, you can make an appointment here. Um, do something just for you. So I actually found that because the energy is so heavy, as you know, like most people come to a reading because, like, I'm like, we're like the ER triage nurses. They're coming because there's often an emergency. And so we're like, okay, all right, and it's like that over and over again. So one of the things I did was I started doing improv, because just for fun, just to go for an hour and a half and be stupid and silly and laugh at myself and laugh at other people, or like doing comedy, things that give you play that are fun and non-taxing is really important. And of course, nature is always the cure for everything. Like, get
Mhm.
your butt, get out and go walk for 20 minutes in nature. So I bird, I'm a birder. Like, that's why I've got like a flamingo shirt, like, because birding is such a help for that, because I just go, I find a bird, I get excited. They're so pretty. And they're not asking me when Chad is coming back, you know, um, or someone's crossed over parent isn't coming through, so
Yeah.
just those ways are extraordinarily helpful, but they're important that we schedule them. Otherwise, we will never do them.
Yeah, yeah. I find um doing activities that are like not at all related to tarot reading, like you said, like improv and stuff like that. I find that is really, really helpful. Like I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but I don't like doing like tarot stuff in my downtime because
Yeah.
that's what I do for work. So when I have free time, I don't want to like read about tarot or watch videos about tarot or do tarot readings for myself. I want to do
Mhm.
something totally you know, not related to tarot.
Yeah, I mean, also like dancing for me. So I love dancing, and that's always really helpful. So yeah, like in my hobbies, I'm actually not doing a lot of new age stuff because
Mhm.
as a practitioner, I need to be able to turn that part of myself off and just be a person. I think one other important thing too is this work is very isolating, right? So you're by yourself doing whatever, or reading for somebody, or working on your business. Um, so you need to find friends that never ask you for a reading. Like maybe they're even skeptical. Who cares? They're atheists. They don't care. They think it's all crap. Fine. But let's just hang out. Let's play a board game. Like you never are asking me to play that role. And so those friends that are always supportive of me, but they're not asking me or taxing that of me, are some of my most closest friends, because with them I can relax and just be Jenna.
Mhm.
And that's really important too.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing. And I think about my own friends that I've chosen, and none of them are into kind of new age stuff or woo-woo stuff. They're all like open-minded. They don't make fun
Mhm.
of me or anything like that.
Yeah.
But they rarely ask me for readings. Like I would say, I have one friend who will ask me for a reading maybe once every 2 years. And my other friends never do. So yeah, that's a really, really good point. And yeah, that's interesting. So, and I like what you said about doing improv, because I feel like doing a tarot reading there's a lot of improv involved. It is kind of
Oh
like
yeah.
an improv. I don't know if I'd say a performance, but it is kind of like, there's so much improv involved in giving someone a tarot reading.
Yeah, I agree. When I tell people I have a chapter in here called Yes, You're Psychic Too. And I talk about like one of the ways you get better at being clairvoyant is to do improv or do games like Taboo, things that are making you just grab that thing that shows up before you go, I don't know, or like, and then it's gone. And then you find out it was right. And you're like, oh, right. Like, that. So
Mhm.
that all of those things also help that skill. Totally. Though I
Yeah.
will say about friends, like I have a lot of colleague friends like yourself and other people that do what I do. And so we have a different way of connecting. So they're not going to ask me for a reading usually, but it's like, oh man, like I've got this challenge. And then you're like, oh, I totally get it. And that's nice too.
Mhm.
So that's where I spend a lot of my time.
Nice. So tell me a little bit more about your new book, Will You Give Me a Reading?
Yes. So will you give me a reading is really partially around how to read tarot, but in a very like, I'm not going to give you lists of this is what this card means and this card means. It's really about all of the things that support a good tarot reading. So like what makes for a good reader outside of being psychic or a good reader or whatever. And I talk about the three pillars. One of them is empathy, and that's different for being an empath. And people that say they're empaths have to do a lot of work. I'm about to say something a little spicy. This is my
Yeah.
hot take. What's the difference between an empath and a codependent? If someone can't tell me, there could be some enmeshment where there's both qualities. And so when someone goes, oh my God, like her emotions, like I just couldn't take it. It was all over me. I couldn't give her a reading. That's not empathy. You're still making it about you. So how do we really show true empathy for people that are struggling, or people that don't know, or people that are at a certain place in their lives? And it's a skill you build. Two, boundaries, like I said. And three, how do you handle criticism? How do you get out of your own way when you're criticized or whatever? Because when you read for people, I'm sure you know this, Kate, like you like someone will come back and go, you know what, like a year ago, you totally said this thing. And you're like, I never talk like that. I know I didn't say that. Has that happened? And you're just like, how did you remember that?
No, I
Right.
don't think that specifically has happened to me.
Oh, really? Like they're like, you said that he was my soulmate. I've had that. I'm like, I never say that ever. I might have said your soul connected or that there's some energy, but that, no, I did not say that. So, or they're like, the reading sucked, right? And it's like the reading was actually really good, but they didn't like it. And so clients are always the best litmus test for how good of a reader we are, because they may respond to the message, not how the message was necessarily delivered, right? So I think like that's what this book talks about, is all of this other stuff that supports you so that you can read well for others and do well by them.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, because there's that, and that's really what I've had to learn the hard way, and probably you too, through like trial and error, because there were no books on that when I was learning tarot and starting to give readings. Like there was not really a lot out there about that. All the books that I read and came across were all very much focused on like the card meanings and kind of like learning the
Mm-hmm.
basics and learning the structure of tarot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to learn all that stuff through trial and error. And I think that the boundary thing is huge. And I think that's really important what you said about the difference between being an empath being a codependent. And I think for me, it is this fine line between being able to sense the feelings of someone else and pick up on it, but then
Mm-hmm.
like hold a space for that, and
Mm-hmm.
have that boundary between like, okay, this is you and what you're
Mm-hmm.
going through, where you're at, and I'm here, and we're going to kind of work together in this reading, but I'm not going to
Right.
totally take on like all your crap.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think for the other person, I think that that would be having a reading from someone who has good boundaries like that and who's able to hold a space would feel kind of like a relief. Like that would feel really supportive, as opposed to a reader who takes on everything and gets like stressed out.
Yeah. I really like want to add that, because that's really great what you said. Like to be an empath is that you are sensing that emotion. But if you're also codependent, the codependent is like, I'm uncomfortable with your emotion. Therefore, I have to fix it. I have to make you feel better. I have to make this problem go away for you. And then that is when we're really leaning into that other category. So I think all empaths, I mean, I don't do empath training, but I would hazard a guess that learning to have that, I'm holding space for this really tough emotion, but it's not mine to carry.
Yeah.
And I don't need it. I don't need to fix it, but I'm going to hold space for it. And I think as readers, sometimes we can be like, oh, that's your problem. Here's a reading and here's your solution. My work here
Yeah.
is done. And
Right.
it's like, wait a minute. Everybody is the expert in their own suffering. And I believe that. And so we want to always make sure that we continue to leave the person who's in charge of the reading has to be your client, not you necessarily. Like we are in service to them. So that's also what I talk about in the book, which is how do we read in a way where we're just not like throwing like, blah, blah, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, and be like, let's how do we do this in a way where consent and you're ready for everything that you're going to hear and you're like in control. Now, tarot is going to say what tarot says. You know that, and I know that. But if we come from a place of really like service instead of like, I'm this guru on this mountain telling you, it really creates very empowering readings that run at the pace that the client can handle. And when I really leaned into that, and I teach that a lot in this book, that's when I really saw my readings open up in a beautiful way that I hadn't, while still also being predictive, This
Mhm.
isn't just therapy. Like, I'm also like, girl, this is like, what's happening. Um, but that's what I talk about in the book. And what you were saying earlier, all the books I have written are because there was no book like that for me when I started. Every one of these books is a labor of love, really, of
Mhm.
like, I got in some deep doo-doo doing party readings and festival readings and nobody to like show me the ropes. So I never wanted someone else to be in that situation. And I never want a good reader to stop reading and serving the world because someone was critical of her. And it was stupid criticism that didn't even really make sense, but it harmed her so much she'll never read again. I want to help her too. That's always been my goal.
Mhm. And your book that you wrote on doing tarot parties was so good, so helpful to me in my own journey with tarot parties, because I had done quite a few before I'd read your book, and some of them had gone well, some of them had been a little bit of a mini disaster. And then once I read your book, I was like, oh my God, this is the book that I should have read years ago. But of course, it didn't exist years before.
Yeah.
And then since I've had I don't do a lot of tarot parties. It's not my favorite thing to do. But since reading your book, I've done a few,
Mhm.
and it's gone so much more smoothly, and it's been so much more fun after reading your book and putting some of the things into practice that you mentioned. Like, a lot of the stuff in that book is just like really practical stuff that I was like overlooking.
Yeah.
Like just like, get it, like when the person first books, like kind of having a contract and getting like really clear on what the expectations are, and then having a plan once you get there about getting people to sign up for readings and kind of staying on time. That was one thing that I was really bad at. So so yeah, it was super invaluable to me.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for that feedback.
Yeah. So what kind of tarot readings are your favorite to do? Like, do you prefer doing parties to just doing like individual readings? Do you like doing relationship readings? Are you into life purpose? Like, what's your favorite way to read?
Um, right now I'm not doing party readings, like my one-on-one work is keeping me so busy that it's honestly uncommon for a party venue to pay me what I could make with individual work. That's just it, the economics. They're like, how much for 2 hours? And I'm like, yeah, I charge you more because it's more work than a
Yeah.
one-on-one. So for me, but if they come to me with like a cool idea and I'm like, wow, that's kind of, so for me, it's like, am I gonna have fun doing this?
Yeah.
Then I'll go and do it, because sometimes party readings allow me to be more silly or more fun or more lighthearted than the heavier one-to-one readings, right?
Mhm.
So I will do gallery style readings and be like, say things like, this is my favorite joke. I use it everywhere, but it's like, the more you drink, the more accurate I am. And everyone loves it. And I'm like, so that's nice. And I love, like, with festival work, I love getting people who've never had a reading before, or they think they know what it's like. And then you sit down and, you just like go, "Blah," and they're just like,
Mhm.
what? And that has just totally shifted their cosmological worldview. I
Mhm.
love being at that place of like, look what just happened. What magic. So for individual readings, I like all of them. I like the mundane ones. I like the more like higher kind of purpose ones. I like relationships. I like work. I like all of it. The only ones I don't like are ones that make me feel icky. So like, oh, what's my ex-husband and his new wife doing kind of stuff. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh. Or like, how can I make him want me? Like that kind of stuff that's super low vibe is it doesn't make me feel good.
So what do you
So
do when you get those kinds of questions? Like, is there any question that you just say no to? Do you
mhm,
try to steer the reading in a different direction? Like, how do you handle those?
yeah. So I never steer it unless I'm very explicit, because again, we want to talk about consent. And one thing that I would really like, I see a lot of newer readers do, and I'm like, please don't do this anymore, where they'll be like, okay, is Chad coming back? And then they'll go, they won't say anything. And they'll do a reading and they'll go, well, let's talk about your relationship to love. And then they read about that and not about the question that the client stated. So what you've done is just pulled a power maneuver where you're like, no, I don't think you should have that question. I'm going to make you listen to this answer instead. And I think that that's harmful, and the querents rarely take that well. So if it's a question I don't like, oh, is Chad coming back for the 10th time? And we've read this a million times. I'm just going to be explicit and say, I can't read on this anymore for you.
Right.
Or this is going against my values if I read in this way. And this is no judgment for you as much as it is for my own personal agreements. So you can either get a refund and find someone who will, or let me give you some other options and see how that feels. And then I leave them to make that option.
Right. Right. Okay.
And
So
it goes well. It goes well. Then, I mean, a lot of people are scared, but it usually goes pretty well.
yeah. I've taken kind of a different approach to reading over the years as I've grown as a reader. And I found I used to take, I don't know if this is what you're talking about or not, but I used to take the person's question and I would put a lot of pressure on myself to answer that question as it was. Like, that's what they want to know. That's the question I have to answer. And as I've gotten more experience, I almost I take their questions as just kind of an indicator of sort of where they're at right now and what's on their mind. But then I kind of put the question aside. I'm like, okay, what cards are going to come up and what's going to come through? And then I'll sort of address that question, but sometimes in kind of an indirect way, so that I don't always answer that question in like a super clear, yes or no kind of way, but I just use it as a guideline for kind of where they're at and what they're wanting information about. I don't know if that's what you were talking about when you said.
No, I think you're kind of expanding it, but I think you're talking about more of a style difference rather than, oh, I'm not going to read that. I'm going to change the question.
Right.
That doesn't sound like what you're doing. You're just like, this is part of this map.
Yeah.
So I always work with the client to come up with a series of questions or understand the map of what's happening, because oftentimes the question they ask isn't the most important question, right?
Yeah.
So but I'll make that explicit back and forth and go, you're saying this, but I'm also hearing actually, let's unpack this together. And they will, and I'll be like, there's this other question that's actually the linchpin behind these other questions that you're asking. And then usually when you say it, they'll go, yeah.
Right.
So I try to answer the stated. So that's like a nuance. I think you and I are now talking about like advanced reading techniques, but the one thing I teach is that I'm always listening for where is the client on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Because sometimes they'll start off with this, like, I want to know about my purpose and love, but you can tell that something specific has brought them there.
Yeah.
That's not been resolved. So then I'm trying to listen for, where are you? And I can meet you there, but is there anything else on that Maslow's that we want to make sure we're addressing? And sometimes I get it wrong. Can I tell a story?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So not too long ago, I was teaching at Omega, and I was doing readings for the class at night in the cafe. And there was one of the students who came, and it was very confusing. When you get someone and you feel like you're having a hard time pinpointing them, they're like this, and you're like, where do I begin? Kind of where am I going? So she tells me the question, and it was kind of all over the place. So I offer more of those higher level, would you like a higher level reading on this aspect? And then she says, yes. So I'm always like, do you want this? Consent. Okay, great. That's where we're headed. And the reading was beautiful. It beautifully answered that. But then after the reading, she said, well, XYZ 1, 2, 3, about a really practical, prescient, immediate situation that I didn't know that that's what she actually really wanted.
Right.
So that's why even still I mess up, because I want to make sure that I can at least address that and then do the other pieces as well, or at
Mhm.
least spend time to address it. Does that make sense? Do I need
I
to?
think so. Yeah, I think you're saying that you sort of rephrased her question for her, and she was like, yeah, that sounds good, but then that wasn't
Right.
really what she was wanting to know about.
Yeah, I'm trying to be vague for
Yeah.
like just confidentiality. So
Sure.
let me give you like an example. Like, let's just say she said, I don't know, like, should I really still be living in Florida or not? Like, I'm not really happy here, but then sometimes blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, well, why don't we do reading on what does your soul want to tell you about Florida? Or is it a connection? And then we do the reading, and it's a really good reading. And then she goes, yeah, but I'm about to be evicted right now.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I was like, wait, why didn't you why didn't you because that was me trying to figure out
Yeah.
where on the hierarchy of needs do we need to first address?
Yes.
So that's why I'm always, it's not, it's always like this kind of back and forth, but that's what I'm always trying to listen for. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And it makes me think of sort of like meeting your client where they're at.
yeah.
If they're coming to you for this like practical thing, trying to bring in this like higher level spiritual big picture approach might not resonate with them or make any sense or be helpful in that moment.
Yeah. So my friend and I talk about this in the book too, she's a resource librarian, and she's like, Jenna, we deal with that all the time. Like they go in and she's like, what are you looking for? And they go, I don't know, like something around like aquatic animals. And then she's like, okay, well, what kind of aquatic animals? Like the kind without bones. Okay. Like, so then this back and forth, and they're like, I'm actually looking for the mating practices of octopi. Well, why didn't you say that? So, like that's how it is. Like as humans, like we kind of start big, and we're testing people. Are you hearing me?
Yeah.
That's part of it. Or I want to see what you say, what you see. Like there's that, which
Yeah.
it will come up, but we've only got
Mhm.
an hour. Do you want to spend that time doing that? Or do we want to
Yeah.
so it's just a human tendency to do that. And so I'm always checking for that
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
making sure. Does that make sense?
I, I, it makes me think of what doctors call doorknob questions, where it's like,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
just as you're leaving the office, you're like, oh, by the way, and then you like bring up some like big thing, like as you're walking out the door. It also makes me think of, I know like a lot of counselors will experience this, where they'll be sitting with a client and they'll talk for a whole hour, and nothing big will really get brought up in that hour. And then when there's 5 minutes of the session left, they're like, oh, by the way, and then they bring up some huge thing, and it's frustrating, but it's also that like it took them just a bit of time to get comfortable to be able
Yeah.
to trust you to bring that forward.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens too. So I do what you do as well sometimes when it's like a really complicated picture and I'm having a hard sense, like my like spidey sense is like can't grab on one hook. So then I'll go, well, let's just do a big general. And if you're okay with it, we'll let the universe determine how the conversation should begin.
Right.
So that is another way that I do, but it's always, especially with a new client, when you don't know kind of how they vibe with you, it's like a little dance you're going to do. And
Yeah.
then once it clicks. But like I always say, like, if you're going to get a tarot reader, talk to them. Don't keep it mum, because a tarot reader is not just listening to get intel to trick you into showing you that they're psychic. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm like a sommelier and you sit down. I'm like, well, what kind of wine would you like?
Right.
You're like, I don't know. And you're like, well, and so it's like, how can I best create a session to meet you where you are, give you what you need, and help you figure out what that even is? Because I hate when people are not satisfied, like,
Yeah.
so that's kind of what I do. And that's what I talk about in the reading. And sometimes people go, well, I don't know. You tell me, that's what I hired you for. And I was like, well, I didn't have Mind Reader anywhere on my website. Like
Yeah.
I can't do that, you
Yeah.
know? So I think like what we do, it's far more complicated than most people understand or give it credit for. And that's all on top of the reading, no wonder
Mhm.
readers burn out. It's a lot.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and I
So,
think and sometimes you get those clients who are like, "Oh, like, do I need to tell you my question or can I keep it to myself?"
mhm,
And I'm like, "That's fine. Like, you don't have to ask any question, but like let me know what you're looking for in this reading. Like, what are you wanting to get out of it? You don't have to tell me anything about you, but just like, are you looking for peace? Are you looking for entertainment? Are like, what are you wanting? Why did you seek me out? I think
right.
that's helpful to know as a reader.
Yeah. And we're all different. Like, we're all not going to have the same approach or read the same. And that's beautiful. Like, the people that resonate with me aren't, may not like other readers. And some people want other readers and they won't like my style. That's totally fine and normal and good. It should be like that.
Yeah, yeah. What do you do to keep yourself like growing as a reader and developing your skills other than
Right.
just experience?
Write books. No. Well, like I love teaching because teaching really forces me to spend the time to go off on fun little tangents that I normally wouldn't in my day-to-day practice. I read a lot of books about a lot of different subjects. So I'm always thinking, how could I approach that in a tarot way? You know, all last year I've been in a pen pal relationship with Rachel Pollack, and her and I are, well, I guess I shouldn't speak for her, but I am a big nerd, tarot, time geek, sci-fi person.
Mhm,
So her and I have been talking about, so in the Amazon, there are tribes that have no words for time, right? Like,
mhm,
if you gave them a deck and said, here, like, do a reading, what would they do? What would that look like? And so I started playing around breaking my sense of time. So I do readings on future lives, not just past lives.
mhm,
I do readings on what almost happened that was horrible, that got evaded, that you don't know.
mhm,
Who are you in a different dimension? What does it look like of a reading if your past and future collapse in on each other in a cyclical fashion, like indigenous peoples believe? So I'm always just playing with those crazy, weird, like just like losing it. And matter of fact, Rachel's book, A Walk Through the Forest of Souls, is being reprinted. It's going to be out in October, where she talks about a lot of this stuff. So,
oh, cool. I that fascinates me, the idea of not just past lives, but future lives, or because I think that we're multifaceted beings. And I think that I'm probably also living simultaneously on another planet as another being. I
yeah,
think that we sort of like we're like fractals, like we're having all these different
yeah.
experiences and different realities. But when you're giving a reading to someone, how do you know if they're going to be open to that kind of stuff? Like if I know upfront someone's open to that, I might like weave that into the reading. But how do you know? Do you look for clues?
I want to come back and say I love the way that you said fractals, because that is so much like I'm seeing more and more that a reading, when you read for somebody, that you're reading for the person right there. And the reading's also speaking to, and maybe you're going to get this, like it's hard for me to explain. This is a new thing I'm kind of vibing with, but everyone is holographic with
Mhm.
all of these aspects of them, like, and the reading will talk to those aspects as well as the aspect in front of you. See, you get what I'm saying, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Like, what is like, so that is what keeps me up at night going, like, if we're the readers, who's the writer? That's my question. Who's the writer? Who's the writer? And maybe I'm going to look like a crazy person with my science hair and like, I don't know. But, so I don't normally read these kind of concepts in my day job because most people are coming for a different type of reading. Do you
Right.
know? But if they're
Mhm.
open to it, I'll be like, hey, you want to do this crazy thing? And they'll be like, yeah. And then we'll have fun with it. No?
Awesome. I love that. Because I love reading on topics like that. I love it when someone asks me a totally kind of off the wall kind of question like that. I find it really exciting to explore. So I want to ask you, Jenna, about, I know you have an upcoming course that's coming up really quick, and I want to ask you about
Yeah.
it.
Thank you so much. So, yeah, September 14th is our first class. It's called Speaker of the Deck. And so if anyone's been listening that's intrigued by my approach and how to read for others, and just a different way to engage and learn with tarot, come aboard. We have 6 classes. It's not like your typical 101. So we're going to talk about this. Like, who are you as a reader? How do you think time works? What is a reading? Like this foundational work about what is going on? What do you think is going on? And then also I will be reading for clients in class. Like I'm going to take a client on and we'll do like a 15-minute reading, and then the students will be watching. And then they're going to give feedback on, I saw that this happened, or this is how you directed it. So it's very much a speaking and reading kind of course for people in a safe environment. I'm not throwing anyone to the wolves.
Nice. That sounds amazing. And so if people want to check that out or sign up, can they find it on your website?
Yep. Everything you can find me is my name, Jenna Matlin, with 2 N's and 1 T and 1 L. Like on my website, on my socials. I also on TikTok, I've started doing like 2-card reading walkthroughs where I take a big vague question and break it into smaller, more specific questions, and then do cards at each of those. So if people just want to watch to see, they're more than welcome. And hopefully it's helpful.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'll put all your links to your website and your socials and everything below this video. So if people are interested, they can check you out. So I just want to say
Thank
thank you
you.
so much, Jenna, for chatting with me. It's been so much fun. And I look forward to reading your new book that's
Yes,
coming out
thank
soon.
you. I know, shameless plug. Hey guys.
Yeah.
Yay.
You shouldn't be, you don't have to feel ashamed.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation with you and having the opportunity to have these fun, deep topics about us as tarot practitioners. So thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you, Jenna.